The late afternoon sun cast long, forgiving shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, glinting off the crystal glasses and polished silverware Carol had spent the morning arranging. The scent of grilled steak and blooming roses mingled in the air, a carefully curated aroma of suburban triumph. It was David's welcome home party, and from the outside, it was a portrait of devotion. A wife, steadfast and loving, celebrating the miraculous return of her husband. But for Caroline Carol Miller, the celebration felt like a wake. For a year, she had been a nurse, a historian, and a stranger in her own home, tending to a man who looked at her with the polite vacancy of a bank teller. She watched him now, holding court near the sprawling oak tree. David Miller, renewed. The car accident had stolen a decade of his memories, but it had seemingly gifted him a fresh, easy charm that captivated their friends. He laughed, a full-throated sound she hadn't heard in years, and rested a hand on the shoulder of Jessica Thorne. Jessica, his private nurse, a woman whose presence had shifted from professional to indispensable in a matter of months. Her smile was a little too bright, her gaze on David a little too possessive. Carol saw the proprietary way Jessica's hand brushed a piece of lint from David's polo shirt, an act of intimacy so casual it screamed of ownership. "We just can't thank you enough, Jessica," gushed a neighbor, Marla. "The way you've brought him back to us. You're a miracle worker." Jessica's blonde hair caught the sun as she tilted her head. "Oh, it was all David. He's the strong one. I was just there to guide him." Carol felt a familiar, bitter taste rise in her throat. She had been the one to reteach him how to use a fork without frustration, to sit through silent nights when the confusion became too much, to gently explain, for the 100th time, who the people in their wedding photos were. She had guided him through the darkness, but Jessica was the one standing with him in the light. The clinking of a spoon against a glass drew everyone's attention. David, looking handsome and healthy, stood on the patio steps. A hush fell over the 40 or so guests. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice smooth and confident. He swept his gaze over the crowd, a practiced political smile on his face. "This past year, it's been like waking up in the middle of a movie. You don't know the characters, you don't know the plot. You're just there." He paused for effect, and the person who handed me the script, who sat with me and explained every scene, was Jessica. He turned to the nurse, his eyes full of a warmth Carol hadn't seen directed at her in a year. "You have been my guiding star, my anchor in the fog. I literally don't know who I'd be today without you." Jessica beamed, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. The crowd murmured its approval. Then, David's eyes found Carol. The warmth vanished, replaced by a polite, distant acknowledgement. It was the look you'd give the caterer. "And, of course, thank you to Carol," he said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. He raised his glass. "Who I'm told is my wife. I appreciate all of this." He gestured vaguely at the party, the house. "But if I'm being honest," he continued, a note of confessional sincerity in his tone, "I have to admit, I feel no connection to the woman standing over there. To me, we are strangers." The words struck Carol with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. It wasn't just a memory lapse, it was a public execution of their entire life together. The pitying glances from her friends were like stones. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. He had not just forgotten her, he had erased her, and he'd done it in front of everyone they knew. As they applauded his brave honesty, Carol stood frozen, a ghost at her own party, the perfect lie of the afternoon finally and completely shattered. The morning after the party, silence descended upon the house, thick and suffocating. After the party, the scent of stale wine and leftover barbecue hung in the air, a phantom of the previous day's humiliation. Carol moved through the rooms like an intruder, collecting glasses and plates, her hands moving with an automated numbness. The home she had so lovingly decorated, every piece of furniture, every framed photograph a testament to a shared history, now felt like a museum of a life that had never existed. David came downstairs late, dressed in athletic wear Jessica had bought him. "She said I used to enjoy running," he'd explained. He moved around Carol with a cautious distance, as if she were a piece of fragile furniture he was afraid of bumping into. He poured himself a coffee, the dark roast Jessica had stocked in their pantry, and scrolled through his phone, a small, private smile playing on his lips. Carol knew, with a certainty that ached in her bones, that he was texting Jessica. "I was thinking," Carol began, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. "We could look through some of the old albums today, the ones from our trip to Italy. You always loved those pictures." David looked up from his phone, his expression a careful blank. "Okay," he said, with the forced enthusiasm of someone agreeing to a tedious chore. Later, they sat on the living room sofa, a chasm of floral upholstery between them. Carol opened the heavy leather-bound album. The first page was a photo of them in Venice, 20 years younger, laughing on a gondola. Carol's head was thrown back in joy, David's arm wrapped securely around her. "See?" she whispered, tracing the outline of his younger face. "This was our honeymoon. You were so happy." David leaned in, studying the photograph with the detached curiosity of a historian examining an artifact. "He looks happy," he conceded, as if speaking of a different person entirely. "I don't remember feeling that. It's strange." He flipped the page, his attention fleeting. There they were, hiking in the Dolomites, sharing a bottle of wine on a Tuscan hillside, kissing by the Trevi fountain. To him, they were just pictures. To her, they were the ghosts of a love he claimed to have forgotten. "Jessica is going to help me sort out my new work schedule this afternoon," he announced, closing the album abruptly. "She's incredible with this stuff. Really organized." The mention of her name was like a needle prick to Carol's heart. Jessica was the present, the future. Carol was the curator of a past he had no interest in visiting. She was a docent in the empty museum of their marriage. That evening, as she lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her colder than it had ever been, she heard him in the guest room, talking on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, only the low, intimate murmur and the soft, recurring sound of his laughter. It was a sound he never made with her anymore. He was sharing his new life with Jessica, while Carol was left alone with the echoes in the hallway, the sole guardian of memories that now felt like nothing more than a cruel, elaborate fiction. She had not only lost her husband to an accident, she was losing him, piece by piece, to a deliberate and quiet campaign of erasure. 2 weeks after the party, the rehabilitation center called. A final box of David's belongings had been found during a storeroom cleanout. It was a task Carol had been dreading, another journey into a past he couldn't share. But she agreed to pick it up. The center was a place of sterile hope and quiet despair. The antiseptic smell of the hallways, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. It all brought back the raw terror of those first few weeks after the crash, when she'd sat by his bed, praying for him to simply open his eyes. The box was waiting for her at the front desk, a plain cardboard carton sealed with packing tape. It was filled with the mundane remnants of his stay. Worn paperbacks, a few magazines, a pair of slippers she didn't recognize. She carried it to her car, her heart heavy with a familiar melancholy. This was it, the last tangible tie to that chapter of their lives. Back home, she set the box on the dining room table and began to sort through it, a final sad ritual. At the bottom, tucked inside the tattered pages of a spy novel, was something hard and rectangular. Her fingers closed around it. She pulled it out. It was a smartphone. His smartphone. Carol stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was the one he'd had with him in the car. They had been told it was lost in the wreckage, likely shattered beyond repair, a casualty of the twisted metal and broken glass. David had been almost relieved, saying it was better to have a clean break from the technology he no longer knew how to use. But here it was, its dark screen intact, a single deep scratch marring the corner. A sudden, foolish flicker of hope ignited within her. It felt like a miracle, a message from the universe. The doctors had said that sensory triggers, familiar sights and sounds, could sometimes bridge the gaps in a damaged memory. This phone was not just a device, it was a vault. It held a decade of their life together. There would be thousands of photos, videos of holidays, silly text message exchanges, notes, and reminders. It was a digital map of the man she had married. Perhaps this was the key. Perhaps seeing a picture he'd taken himself, hearing a voicemail from an old friend, or reading a text exchange between the two of them could spark something. It could be the jolt his brain needed to reboot, to find its way back to her. She clutched the phone to her chest, its cool, smooth surface a stark contrast to the frantic beating of her heart. For the first time in a year of crushing despair, she felt a fragile, tentative sense of possibility. This small, forgotten object wasn't just a phone. It was hope, solid and real, resting in the palm of her hand. The last piece of the puzzle, she thought. The one that could finally make him whole again. The one that could bring him home. Carol's hands trembled as she searched the junk drawer for a charger that would fit the old phone. The mundane act felt monumental, each second stretching into an eternity. Finding one, she plugged the phone in and set it on the kitchen counter, watching it as if it were a bomb. After a moment, the screen flickered to life, displaying a low battery symbol. Life. It had survived. She let it charge for what felt like an hour, pacing the kitchen, her mind racing with possibilities. She imagined showing David a video of their dog, Sparky, as a puppy. She pictured his face as he saw photos from his 40th birthday party, surrounded by friends he now claimed not to know. This could be the breakthrough. This could be everything. Finally, she couldn't wait any longer. She powered it on. The screen lit up, and her heart sank. The wallpaper wasn't the picture of the Tuscan sunset she remembered. It was a selfie of David and Jessica, taken in the sunny garden of the rehab center. He was smiling broadly, and Jessica was leaning into him, her expression smug and triumphant. It was a picture of a couple, a happy couple. A cold wave of unease washed over Carol, extinguishing the warm glow of hope. Why would he set this as his wallpaper if his phone was lost before Jessica was even his full-time nurse? It didn't make sense. Shaking her head, she tried to dismiss it. He was confused. His memory was gone. There was an explanation. She swiped the screen to unlock it, and a password field appeared. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She tried his birthday. Incorrect password. She tried his mother's birthday, his old license plate number, the name of his first pet. Incorrect password. Incorrect password. Try again in 1 minute. Panic began to set in. This was the final hurdle. There was one last code she could think of, a number she had teased him about for being so sentimental, a password he'd used for everything from his bank account to his fantasy football league. With a sense of dread, she typed in the 6 digits, 081498, the day they met. The phone unlocked. The home screen, with its familiar grid of apps, appeared. But before her eyes could even focus, a notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was a new text message. The contact name read, Jess. Carol's blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, unable to breathe, her vision blurring. The words of the preview text were stark and brutal against the white background, seeming to burn themselves directly into her brain. Is she buying it? Almost time for our new life to start. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The 4 walls of the kitchen seemed to close in on her. The message wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. Buying it. It was a performance. A lie. The hope she had so carefully nurtured just moments before curdled into a sickening black horror. The pit in her stomach was no longer just dread. It was the chilling, absolute certainty of a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. She froze, the device clutched in her hand, no longer a key to his past, but a venomous snake that had just delivered its fatal bite. Chapter 5. The Unveiling. For a long moment, Carol couldn't move. She just stared at the damning words on the screen, her world tilting on its axis. The air grew thin, the silence in the house roaring in her ears. Then a new feeling pushed through the shock, an ice-cold resolve that steadied her trembling hands. She had to know. She had to see it all. With a deep, shuddering breath, she tapped open the message thread with Jess. Her thumb began to scroll upwards, reversing time, peeling back the layers of the most monstrous lie she could have ever imagined. It was all there, laid out in cold, blue and gray text bubbles. The affair had started nearly a year before the accident. There were flirtatious messages, clandestine lunch plans, and explicit photos that made Carol feel a violent surge of nausea. Then the messages took a darker turn, focused on their problem. Her. David. She'll never agree to a divorce without a fight. She'll take me for everything. Jess. There has to be a way to just make her disappear. The crash was real, a random, terrifying event. But the messages from the days following, sent while Carol was holding vigil in the hospital waiting room, revealed the birth of their cruel masterpiece. Jess. The doctor said you have a bad concussion. They're worried about memory loss. David. Wait, this could be it. Jess. What do you mean? David. The way out. The perfect way out. What if I just don't remember her? Carol felt a strangled sob escape her lips. She scrolled faster, the screen a blur of their plotting. They had concocted the amnesia right there in his hospital bed. Jessica, with her nursing background, had coached him on the symptoms, on what to say and how to act. They mocked Carol's devotion in their private texts. David. She just brought me soup again. Her face was all crumpled with worry. So pathetic. Jess. Just keep playing the confused husband. You're a natural. She's eating it up. Soon you'll be free, baby. The final crushing blow came when she switched from texts to his saved voicemails. She pressed play on the most recent one. Jessica's voice, bubbly and cruel, filled the silent kitchen. Hey, baby, she cooed. Just thinking about our plan. It's genius, truly. She plays the doting wife for a few more weeks. We make sure the finances are all in your name, and then you tell her you need a clean break to heal. She'll be so heartbroken and full of pity, she'll walk away with nothing. We'll be in the Bahamas before she even knows what hit her. I love you. Then came David's voice, a saved message from him to her. It's working perfectly, he said, and then he laughed. It was a low, conspiratorial chuckle, the same intimate sound she'd heard through the guest room door. It was the sound of her entire life being dismantled for sport. The sound of his laughter was what finally did it. The profound, soul-crushing grief that had been her constant companion for a year evaporated in a flash of white-hot rage. The tears on her cheeks dried. The woman who had wept for a lost husband was gone. In her place sat someone else entirely, a woman who had been played for a fool, a woman whose love had been used as a weapon against her, and she was done being the victim. She set the phone down on the counter, her movements precise and deliberate. Her heart was no longer breaking. It was hardening into steel. Carol stood at the kitchen sink, splashing cold water on her face, washing away the last traces of tears. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window over the sink. The face staring back was pale and taut, but the eyes were different. The soft, pained vulnerability was gone, replaced by a glint of polished stone. She had a purpose now. The game was not over. The rules had just changed. She took a moment to compose herself, smoothing her hair and straightening her sweater. She practiced a smile in the reflection. It was a fragile, brittle thing, but it would have to do. Armed with the devastating truth and a chilling calm, she walked back into the living room. David and Jessica were curled together on the sofa, her sofa, watching a movie. A single large bowl of popcorn sat between them, and their shoulders were pressed together in easy intimacy. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance at the interruption. "Oh, Carol," David said, his tone dripping with false concern. "I thought you'd gone to lie down. You looked so tired." "I'm fine," she said, her voice even and light. She walked over to the armchair opposite them, the perfect picture of the dutiful, heartbroken wife. "I just wanted to see if you two needed anything. Another drink, Jessica? David, are you warm enough?" Jessica gave her a condescendingly sweet smile. "We're just fine, Carol. You should really think about yourself." "You've been through so much," David added, shaking his head in feigned sympathy. He reached over and patted Jessica's knee, a gesture of reassurance that was clearly not meant for Carol. They exchanged a quick, knowing glance over her head, a silent communication of their shared victory. Their arrogance was so blatant, it was almost laughable. They saw her as a solved problem, a gentle obstacle that had been successfully navigated. Carol absorbed their smugness, their pity, their complete underestimation of her. She let it fuel the fire inside her. She was a ghost to them, a piece of the scenery in the final act of their play. They had no idea she had read the script. "You're probably right," Carol said, rising from the chair. It has been a long day. She turned to leave the room, then paused in the doorway as if struck by a sudden thought. But first, I noticed there are still a few friends lingering in the backyard. It would be rude of me not to say a proper goodbye, wouldn't it? David shrugged, already turning his attention back to the television. Whatever you think is best, Carol. Yes, she said, a new sharp edge to her voice that they were too self-absorbed to detect. I think it is. She walked out of the room, leaving them to their movie, completely oblivious to the fact that the final curtain was about to fall, and they were the ones standing center stage. The air in the backyard had cooled, and the remaining guests, a small, loyal contingent of their oldest friends and Carol's brother, were gathered on the patio, speaking in the hushed, concerned tones people use in the presence of grief. They quieted as Carol approached, their faces etched with sympathy. "Carol, honey, are you okay?" asked Marla, her neighbor, reaching out to touch her arm. Carol gave her a small, tight smile. "I will be," she said, her voice surprisingly steady and clear. It carried across the patio, commanding the space. "Actually, could I have everyone's attention for just one moment?" Curious, David and Jessica appeared in the sliding glass doorway behind her, their arms crossed, watching the scene with detached amusement. They likely assumed she was about to have a public, emotional breakdown. Carol stood in the center of the patio, the small group forming a semicircle around her. She looked at each of them, her gaze lingering for a moment on David. "I just want to thank you all again for coming to welcome David home," she began, her tone formal. "It's been a long, confusing year, a year of lost memories." She paused, letting the words hang in the still evening air. "But sometimes things that are lost have a way of being found, and I'd like to share a memory that seems to have just returned to me." Before anyone could process her strange words, she pulled David's phone from her pocket. With swift, practiced movements, she swiped the screen and tapped the icon for the large Bluetooth speaker they'd been using for party music. The electronic chime of the connection was jarringly loud, slicing through the quiet anticipation. David's eyes widened slightly in confusion, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Jessica shifted her weight, a frown touching her lips. Then, Carol pressed play. Jessica's voice, sharp and clear, erupted from the speaker. "Hey, baby, just thinking about our plan. It's genius. Truly." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Faces turned from Carol to David, their expressions morphing from sympathy to disbelief. "She'll be so heartbroken and full of pity she'll walk away with nothing. We'll be in the Bahamas before she even knows what hit her. I love you." The voicemail ended, but Carol wasn't finished. She played the next one, the saved message from David, his voice full of cruel, conspiratorial laughter as he talked about her pathetic soup and devoted bedside manner. The audio filled the stunned silence of the backyard. The ugly, undeniable truth of it echoed off the walls of the house. Marla's hand flew to her mouth. Carol's brother took a protective step closer to her, his face a mask of thunderous rage. The entire elaborate lie was laid bare, broadcast for all to hear. Carol watched as the mask of charming confusion on David's face shattered, replaced by the stark, pale terror of a man who had just been caught in his own trap. The instant David's laughing voice faded from the speaker, a profound and horrifying silence descended upon the patio. It was broken only by the chirping of crickets, indifferent witnesses to the complete implosion of a man's life. Every eye was fixed on David, whose face had drained of all color, leaving behind a waxy, slack-jawed mask of pure panic. Then, in a desperate, theatrical gambit, he acted. He cried out, clutching his head with both hands as if struck by a physical blow. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a performance so transparent it was insulting. "The voices! The speaker! It's like a jolt! I remember! Carol! Oh my God, I remember everything now!" He staggered forward, his arms outstretched, trying to reach for her as if he were a man awakening from a long nightmare. But the audience was no longer his to command. His performance was met with cold, unified disgust. Carol's brother, Mark, stepped directly into his path, a solid wall of fury. "Don't you dare touch her," Mark growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're a monster, David," Marla whispered, the words dripping with contempt. Jessica, seeing the tide turn with lethal speed, began to back away toward the shadows of the yard, trying to slip away unnoticed. But Marla's husband moved to block her path, his expression grim. She was trapped. Carol looked at the pathetic, crumbling man who had been her husband. He was staring at her, his eyes pleading, desperately trying to sell the lie of his miraculous recovery. But she felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even sadness. There was only a vast, cold emptiness where her heart used to be. "It's amazing what a little jolt to the system can do for your memory, isn't it?" she said, her voice as calm and sharp as ice. She held up the phone, the source of his ruin. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours," she stated, each word a perfectly placed nail in the coffin of their marriage. "He'll find this phone and its entire contents very, very interesting." She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need one. Turning her back on the wreckage, on David's fake anguish, on Jessica's trapped animal panic, on the stunned faces of their friends, she walked away. She moved past her brother, who gave her a nod of fierce pride, and through the stunned crowd. Past her brother. She didn't stop at the front door. She walked straight down the driveway and onto the quiet suburban street. The evening air was cool and clean on her face. With every step she took away from the house, the weight of the past year, the weight of a life built on a lie, began to lift from her shoulders. She wasn't walking away from an ending. She was walking toward the sharp, clean, and infinite relief of a beginning. She was, at long last, free.